The gold rush. Just the name conjures up images, doesn't it? Prospectors with scraggly beards, panning for gleaming nuggets under a blazing sun, instant riches, boom towns overflowing with opportunity, and a land ripe for the taking. It's a powerful image, one that's been carefully crafted and perpetuated through countless books, movies, and, let's be honest, a good bit of romanticizing. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But what if I told you that the reality of the gold rush was, well, a whole lot less glamorous? Because it was. The truth is, the romantic image we have of the gold rush, that shining picture of easy fortune and carefree adventure, is built on a foundation of myths. And in this video, we're going to gently dismantle those myths, one by one, and take a look at what a gold miner's life really looked like. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Oh, here we go, another history buzzkill, ready to ruin all the fun. But that's not our intention at all. We just believe that the true story of the gold rush, with all its grit, hardship, and surprising details, is far more interesting and honestly more inspiring than the sanitized version we usually hear. So let's start with the big one. The idea that the gold rush was about striking it rich. Think of those stories of individuals finding fortunes seemingly overnight. While those stories did happen, they were incredibly rare. The vast majority of prospectors didn't become wealthy. In fact, many barely eked out a living. The gold fields were less a land of guaranteed riches and more a lottery, where the odds were heavily stacked against you. We need to remember that finding gold wasn't like picking apples from a tree. It required back-breaking labor, immense patience, and a healthy dose of luck. Imagine spending your days waist-deep in icy water, sifting through tons of gravel, only to find a few tiny flakes of gold, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread. That was the reality for most. And what about those boom towns overflowing with opportunity? Sure, towns like San Francisco exploded in population seemingly overnight. But along with the rapid growth came a whole host of problems: overcrowding, rampant disease, sky-high prices, and a complete lack of basic infrastructure. Imagine living in a cramped tent, surrounded by garbage, with the constant threat of cholera or typhoid hanging over your head. Not exactly a picture of paradise, is it? Another common myth is that the gold rush was a simple story of individual grit and determination. The lone prospector striking out on his own and conquering the wilderness. While individual effort was certainly important, the gold rush was actually a highly complex social and economic phenomenon. Mining often required teamwork and investment. Think about the massive hydraulic mining operations that reshaped entire landscapes. These were large-scale enterprises requiring significant capital and a workforce of hundreds. And speaking of teamwork, let's address another pervasive myth: that the gold rush was primarily a male endeavor. While men certainly dominated the gold fields, women played a vital role too. They ran businesses, provided essential services, and even mined alongside their husbands and brothers. Their stories are often overlooked, but they're an integral part of the gold rush narrative. We'll be sure to highlight some of those later on. Then there's the myth of the untamed wilderness, the idea that the gold rush took place in a pristine, untouched land. But the truth is, the arrival of the gold seekers had a devastating impact on the environment and the indigenous populations. Rivers were polluted, forests were destroyed, and Native American communities were displaced and decimated. It's a dark chapter in American history, and one that we can't ignore. We'll delve into that more deeply as we go along as well. So if the gold rush wasn't about easy riches, carefree adventure, and untamed wilderness, what was it really about? It was about hope, desperation, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. It was about the clash of cultures, the exploitation of resources, and the dramatic transformation of a landscape. It was about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges and often enduring unimaginable hardships. It was a complex, messy, and often tragic story, but it's also a story that deserves to be told accurately and honestly. Over the next few minutes, we'll step away from the romanticized myths and explore the reality of the gold rush. We'll delve into the daily lives of the miners, the tools they used, the food they ate, and the challenges they faced. We'll examine the social landscape, the role of women, the impact on Native Americans, and the environmental consequences of the gold rush. So settle in, relax, and prepare to have your perceptions challenged, because the real story of the gold rush is far more fascinating and far more meaningful than any legend. And hopefully, by the end, we'll all have a clearer understanding of what life was really like for those who chased the dream of gold. All right, so you've caught gold fever. Images of nuggets the size of your fist are probably dancing in your head, right? You're picturing yourself instantly wealthy, a king in the Golden State. That's what the pamphlets and newspapers promised, and honestly, who could resist that siren song? But before you start packing your bags with, well, probably the wrong things, let's talk about what the journey actually looked like. Because getting to California, that was a gold rush in itself, and a lot tougher than panning for gold. First up, there were really only a few main routes. Most people, especially in the early days, came by sea. Imagine you're on the East Coast, or maybe even Europe. The shortest sea route was around Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. This was a brutal voyage. Think months and months crammed onto a sailing ship, the size of maybe your house, with hundreds of other hopefuls. Seasickness was rampant, hygiene practically non-existent. Food was usually salted meat, hardtack biscuits that could break your teeth, and maybe some beans if you were lucky. Fresh water was precious, and often less than fresh. Storms were a constant threat, and Cape Horn itself was notorious for shipwrecks. We're talking about icebergs, hurricane-force winds, and waves that could swallow your entire ship whole. It was a long, boring, and dangerous trip. Deaths from disease, accidents, and just plain exhaustion were common. You might set off with high hopes, but you'd arrive in California completely worn down and probably a little traumatized. The other sea route was via Panama. This was shorter in terms of distance, but arguably even more perilous. You'd sail to the Isthmus of Panama, cross the isthmus on foot or by mule, and that, my friends, was an adventure in suffering. The Panamanian jungle, in the mid-19th century, was a breeding ground for disease. Yellow fever, malaria, cholera, you name it, it was probably lurking there. The heat and humidity were oppressive, and the terrain was rough and unforgiving. You'd be hacking your way through dense jungle, battling insects, and dealing with corrupt locals who were keen to overcharge you for everything. And once you finally crossed the isthmus, you'd have to wait for another ship on the Pacific side to take you up to California. This whole process could take weeks, even months, and it was a gauntlet of disease and discomfort. Many people died on the Panama route, and those who survived were often weakened and vulnerable. Then there was the overland route. Now this might sound appealing if you didn't like boats, but trust me, it was no picnic either. The main overland trails, like the Oregon Trail and the California Trail, stretched for over 2,000 miles across the Great Plains, deserts, and mountains. You'd be traveling by wagon train, a convoy of covered wagons pulled by oxen or mules. These trips usually took 4 to 6 months. Imagine walking alongside a wagon all day, every day for months. The dust would be thick and choking. The heat in the summer was scorching, and the cold in the mountains was brutal. Food was again a problem. You'd start with supplies, of course, but those would dwindle quickly. You might have to hunt for game, but that was never guaranteed. Water sources were often scarce and unreliable. Think stagnant pools filled with things you don't want to think about. And then there were the dangers. The most feared was probably disease. Cholera was a constant threat, and outbreaks could wipe out entire wagon trains. Accidents were also common. Wagons could overturn, people could get injured by animals, and river crossings were particularly dangerous. And of course there was the threat of conflict with Native American tribes. While many encounters were peaceful, there were also instances of attacks and raids, driven by the increasing encroachment on native lands. The overland journey required meticulous planning and preparation. You needed a sturdy wagon, strong animals, enough food and supplies to last for months, and a good guide. But even with the best planning, things could go wrong. Weather could turn against you, animals could die, and accidents could happen. The trail was littered with abandoned wagons, dead animals, and the graves of those who didn't make it. Regardless of which route you chose, the journey west was expensive. Passage on a ship could cost hundreds of dollars, a significant sum in those days. Outfitting a wagon train could cost even more, and that's before you even factored in the cost of supplies, tools, and equipment for mining. Many people arrived in California already deeply in debt, having mortgaged their homes or borrowed money to finance their journey. And here's the kicker. The journey itself was often the easy part. Reaching California didn't guarantee you'd find gold or even survive. You'd arrive exhausted, possibly sick, and almost certainly broke. You'd be stepping into a chaotic and competitive environment where the cost of living was sky high and the competition for gold was fierce. So before you pack that pickaxe and head west, remember the journey. It was a trial by fire, a crucible that tested the limits of human endurance. It was a journey that separated the dreamers from the doers, the lucky from the unlucky, and sadly, the living from the well. You get the picture. It was a harsh reality check, a reminder that the road to riches was paved with hardship, sacrifice, and a whole lot of, well, let's just say it wasn't always gold. All right, so you've made it. You've crossed plains, maybe sailed around the Horn, or hacked your way through a mosquito-infested swamp. You're finally in gold country, but finding a vein of glittering ore isn't going to be your biggest challenge for the first little bit. Before the gold, there's survival. Setting up camp is absolutely crucial. It's not just about finding a pretty spot by the river. It's about establishing a base of operations that will keep you alive and somewhat sane in a really unforgiving environment. Let's start with location. Location, location. It's the mantra of real estate, but trust me, it's just as important for a gold rush miner. You might be tempted to pitch your tent right next to the creek, thinking it's convenient for water. And well, it is. But think about the consequences. Creeks flood, especially during the spring thaw or after heavy rains. A dry creek bed might seem like a tempting area as well, but this may be the first spot to turn into a raging stream when the weather turns. Waking up in the middle of the night with your camp underwater is not the gold rush experience you're aiming for. Been there, done that, wouldn't recommend. Elevated ground is your friend. Look for a spot that's slightly higher than the surrounding area. This gives you better drainage and helps avoid those unexpected water surprises. Think like a squirrel, a bit higher up, offers a better vantage point too. You want to be able to see what's coming, be it friendly faces or, well, less friendly ones. Next, consider your neighbors. You're probably not alone out there. While solitude might sound appealing, there's safety in numbers. Setting up camp near other miners can provide a sense of community and, more importantly, security. But choose wisely. Observe your potential neighbors for a few days. Are they hardworking and relatively peaceful, or do they seem like the types to borrow your tools and forget to return them? Proximity to a larger camp or a developing town offers both protection and access to supplies, but also higher risks of theft or disputes. Finding that balance is key. All right, you've got your spot picked out. Now comes the fun part. Actually setting up camp. This is where you start building your little slice of civilization in the wilderness. And trust me, civilization is exactly what you'll miss. The first order of business is shelter. For most miners, especially in the early days, this meant a tent. Canvas tents were relatively cheap and easy to transport, making them the go-to option. Now, a simple canvas tent offers minimal protection from the elements, so think about enhancing it. Dig a shallow trench around the tent to divert rainwater. Reinforce the tent poles with sturdy branches, and for goodness sake, secure that tent to the ground. You don't want to wake up one morning and find your home has blown away in the night. If you're planning on staying in one place for a while, consider building something more substantial. A simple log cabin or a dugout can provide much better protection from the weather and offer a greater sense of security. These take more time and effort to construct, but they're well worth it in the long run. Think of it as an investment in your sanity. Next up, fire. Fire is life. It provides warmth, light, a way to cook food, and a little bit of comfort in a cold, dark world. Choose your fire pit location carefully. Clear away any dry leaves or brush that could catch fire. Build a ring of stones around the pit to contain the flames and prevent them from spreading. And always have a source of water nearby to extinguish the fire if it gets out of control. It's better to be safe than sorry. Believe me when I say you do not want to be responsible for a forest fire. Speaking of water, finding a reliable source of clean drinking water is absolutely essential. Don't just assume that the water in the creek is safe to drink. It could be contaminated with bacteria, parasites, or other nasties that will make you very, very sick. Boiling your water for at least 1 minute will kill most of the harmful microorganisms. You can also filter the water through a cloth or use a commercial water filter if you have one. Trust me, a few extra minutes of preparation is worth avoiding days of misery with dysentery. Food storage is another critical consideration. You need to protect your food from animals, insects, and the elements. Store your food in airtight containers and keep them in a cool, dry place. Hanging your food from a tree branch can help keep it away from rodents and other ground-dwelling creatures. Just make sure the branch is strong enough to support the weight of your supplies. Now, let's talk about sanitation. This is not a glamorous topic, but it's absolutely essential for preventing the spread of disease. Dig a latrine, a simple hole in the ground, well away from your camp and your water source. Cover your waste with dirt after each use to control odors and keep flies away. And for goodness sake, wash your hands regularly with soap and water. Good hygiene is your best defense against illness. Finally, think about security. The gold rush attracted all sorts of characters, not all of them savory. Protect your camp and your belongings from theft. Consider setting up a simple alarm system, a string of tin cans that will rattle if someone approaches your camp at night. And always keep a weapon within easy reach. A rifle, a shotgun, or even a sturdy knife can be a lifesaver in a dangerous situation. Setting up camp in the gold rush was no easy task. It required hard work, ingenuity, and a good dose of common sense. But by following these basic principles, you could create a safe and comfortable base of operations that would allow you to focus on the real task at hand, finding gold. Because at the end of the day, comfort is what's needed to focus on the goal. And the comfier you are, the better you are at your job. All right, settle in, because we're about to delve into the nitty-gritty, the daily grind, the thing that separated the dreamers from those who, well, just kept dreaming. We're talking about the back-breaking, bone-jarring, soul-crushing physical labor of mining for gold. Forget those images of prospectors striking it rich with a single pan. The reality, it was a whole lot less romantic and a whole lot more exhausting. Imagine waking before dawn, the air still biting cold, even in summer. The promise of sunshine is there, but it does little to ease the stiffness in your joints. You're probably sleeping in a tent, or maybe a rough-hewn shack if you're lucky. Comfort isn't exactly a priority when you're chasing gold. A quick, probably cold, and probably unappetizing breakfast is wolfed down, because you know what's coming. Then, it's off to the claim. Now, depending on the location and the type of mining, this could mean a trek, uphill, through mud, with tools, lots of tools. Remember, these weren't lightweight, ergonomic things. We're talking heavy pickaxes, shovels that felt like they weighed a ton, and pans that threatened to dislocate your shoulder every time you used them. Let's say you're placer mining. That means you're working with loose gold deposits, usually found in riverbeds or stream beds. This was the most common type of mining, and it involved a lot of digging. You'd be shoveling gravel, sand, and mud into your pan, and then the panning. Picture this. You're standing knee-deep in icy water, the sun beating down on your back, sweat dripping into your eyes. You're swirling the pan, gently coaxing the heavier gold particles to settle at the bottom while the lighter materials wash away, over and over, and over, again and again and again. Hours on end, day after day. Your back aches, your arms are screaming, and your fingers are numb from the cold. And for what? Maybe a few flakes of gold, maybe nothing. The hope is always there, shimmering just beneath the surface of the water. But the reality is, most days yielded very little. Now, let's talk about hydraulic mining. This was a larger scale operation, and it involved using powerful jets of water to blast away entire hillsides in search of gold-bearing gravel. Sounds easier, right? Well, not really. It was still incredibly labor-intensive. You'd be responsible for maintaining the water cannons, directing the flow, and clearing away the debris. And trust me, there was a lot of debris. Think about the force of those water jets. They could move tons of earth in a single day, but they also posed a significant risk. Landslides were common, and miners were often injured or even killed by falling rocks or collapsing slopes. Then there was hard rock mining, which was the most dangerous and physically demanding of all. This involved digging deep into the earth to extract gold from veins of quartz rock. This meant drilling, blasting, and hauling tons of rock and ore. Imagine being hundreds of feet underground, in a narrow, dark tunnel, the air thick with dust and the smell of gunpowder. You're swinging a pickaxe, chipping away at the rock face, your muscles burning with exhaustion. The only light comes from a flickering candle, casting eerie shadows that dance around you. The risk of cave-ins was constant, and miners often suffered from respiratory problems due to the poor ventilation and the inhalation of dust and harmful gases. Explosions were also a major hazard, and many miners lost their lives in accidents involving blasting powder. After a long day of back-breaking labor, the work wasn't over. Tools needed to be cleaned and sharpened, repairs needed to be made, and food needed to be prepared. Simple meals, often consisting of beans, bacon, and hardtack, were cooked over a smoky campfire. And then finally, you could collapse into your bed, exhausted and sore. But even then, sleep wasn't always easy to come by. The cold, the damp, and the ever-present worry about finances could keep you awake for hours. This was the reality of the gold rush, not the glamorous, romanticized version we often see in movies and books. It was a life of relentless toil, hardship, and uncertainty. It was a test of endurance, both physical and mental, and it's a testament to the resilience and determination of those who risked everything in pursuit of their dreams, even when those dreams were buried beneath tons of rock and dirt. So when you think of a gold rush miner, remember the grit, the sweat, and the unwavering spirit that defined their daily lives. And maybe, just maybe, let out a little sigh of relief that you aren't the one panning for gold right now. That's the kind of thing that helps me sleep at night, anyway. Alright, settle in, friends. Now imagine you're standing on the banks of a rushing river in California, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. You've made it. You're finally here, ready to strike it rich. But hold on a second. You can't just scoop gold out of the riverbed with your bare hands, can you? No, my friend. You're going to need some tools. And not just any tools, the right tools. So let's take a gentle stroll through the dusty world of a gold miner's equipment, shall we? First up, the undisputed king of gold panning, the pan itself. Now these weren't just any old pie tins. They were usually made of iron, shallow and wide, with gently sloping sides. Think of a large, slightly curved dinner plate, only much sturdier. The idea was simple. Scoop up some gravel and sediment from the riverbed, submerge the pan in water, and then with a swirling, rocking motion, gently wash away the lighter materials, sand, silt, little pebbles, all gone, leaving behind, hopefully, some heavier gold particles glinting at the bottom. It was a slow, methodical process, requiring a steady hand and a whole lot of patience. Picture yourself, hour after hour, repeating this same motion, your back aching, the sun beating down. It might not sound glamorous, but it was the bread and butter, or rather the gold and beans, of many a hopeful miner. But a gold pan alone, that's just the starting point. Let's talk about the trusty shovel and pickaxe. These were essential for digging, moving earth, and breaking up hard-packed soil or rock. A good pickaxe could mean the difference between accessing a promising vein and giving up in frustration. These were the tools for the heavy lifting, the brute force required to unearth the potential riches hidden beneath the surface. Think of them as extensions of the miner's own strength, levers that allowed them to move mountains, or at least a whole lot of dirt. And believe me, there was a whole lot of dirt to move. Now, if you really wanted to step up your game, you'd invest in a rocker box, sometimes called a cradle. This ingenious device was essentially a mechanized version of the gold pan, allowing you to process much larger quantities of material in a much shorter time. Imagine a wooden box, shaped like a baby's cradle, mounted on rockers. You dump in your gravel and sediment at one end, add water, and then, using a rocking motion, agitate the mixture. The water would wash away the lighter materials, while the heavier gold particles would settle onto riffles, those little wooden ridges, at the bottom of the box. It was a significant improvement over the pan, increasing efficiency and allowing miners to tackle larger-scale operations. But it still required muscle power, the constant rocking motion becoming a rhythm of hope and hard work. And then there's the long tom, a larger, more sophisticated version of the rocker box. Think of it as the rocker box's older, wiser sibling. The long tom was a long, sloping trough with riffles along its bottom. Water was channeled through the trough, carrying the sediment along, while the riffles trapped the gold. It was a semi-automated process, requiring less manual labor than the rocker box, but still needing a constant supply of water and plenty of elbow grease to shovel in the material. These were often group efforts, multiple miners working together to feed the long tom and reap the rewards. For those who were really serious about their mining, there was hydraulic mining. This was the big leagues, involving powerful jets of water to blast away entire hillsides, exposing gold-bearing gravels. It was a highly effective method, but also incredibly destructive to the environment, causing massive erosion and polluting waterways. While hydraulic mining yielded significant amounts of gold, it also led to conflicts with farmers and environmentalists, eventually leading to its regulation and decline. It's a potent reminder that even the most efficient methods can have unforeseen and devastating consequences. Now, let's not forget the smaller but equally important tools. Things like shovels with specialized scoops for easier loading, different-sized picks for getting into tight spots, and knives to help break down larger clumps of dirt. And of course, a sturdy knife was essential for everything from cutting rope to preparing food. And what about containers? You needed something to carry your precious gold dust and nuggets, right? Miners often used leather pouches, small tin cans, or even hollowed-out gourds to store their findings. Security was a constant concern, so these containers were often hidden away or kept close at hand. Another vital piece of equipment was a good set of scales. Because gold wasn't always paid for with paper money, gold dust and nuggets were weighed out to pay for goods and services, and it was really important to know you weren't getting ripped off. Of course, some people did try to tip the scales, so to speak, but a careful miner kept a close watch over their measurements. Beyond the actual mining equipment, there were the tools needed for survival. A sturdy tent or canvas shelter to protect from the elements, a reliable rifle for hunting game and defending against threats, and cooking utensils to prepare meals. These were all essential components of a miner's toolkit, ensuring they could survive and thrive in the harsh environment of the gold fields. So there you have it, a glimpse into the tools of the gold rush trade. From the humble gold pan to the powerful hydraulic monitors, each tool played a role in the pursuit of fortune. It wasn't just about luck, it was about skill, ingenuity, and a whole lot of hard work. Now close your eyes for a moment, and imagine yourself holding that gold pan, feeling the weight of the gravel and the thrill of the chase. The gold rush was a time of dreams and determination, fueled by the hope of striking it rich. And every swing of the pickaxe, every swirl of the pan, was a step closer to that dream, a slow and peaceful step. Alright, let's settle in and talk about something truly essential to a gold miner's life. Food. Sustenance. Keeping that engine running day in and day out. Because trust me, swinging a pickaxe all day burns a lot of calories, and getting enough to eat, well, that was often a monumental struggle. Forget about gourmet meals, we're talking survival here. The romantic images of overflowing chuck wagons and campfire feasts, mostly fantasy. The reality was far grittier, far more basic, and often just plain monotonous. The primary staple for most miners was what they called salt pork. Think of it as extremely heavily salted pork belly. It was cheap, relatively non-perishable, key in a time before refrigeration, obviously, and provided a much-needed boost of fat and protein. It was usually boiled, fried, or added to stews. And I mean everything. If you were lucky, you might get it with some beans, but day in, day out, salt pork was the main event. Imagine eating that 3 times a day. It's enough to make you crave, well, anything else. Another common item was hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit or sea biscuit. This was essentially a rock-hard cracker made from flour, water, and sometimes salt. It was designed to last for months, even years, without spoiling. But it was incredibly tough. Seriously, you could break a tooth on it. Miners would often soften it by soaking it in coffee, water, or even smashing it into crumbs and adding it to their stew. Sometimes, if it had been stored improperly, it would be infested with weevils. But hey, extra protein, right? Miners weren't exactly picky. They would often just tap the hardtack on a hard surface to dislodge the bugs and then eat it anyway. Waste not, want not, as they say. Beans were a vital source of nutrients and helped to balance out the constant salt pork. Usually they were dried beans, which miners had to cook up in large quantities, and they'd become a regular side dish to their salt pork, or they would be mixed into soups or stews. Coffee. Oh, coffee. That was the lifeblood of the mining camps. Not necessarily good coffee, mind you. Often it was bitter, strong, and brewed with whatever was available, but it provided a much-needed jolt of energy for those long, arduous days. It was also used to soften hardtack, and more importantly, provided a sense of normalcy and routine in a very chaotic world. Imagine waking up before dawn, shivering in the cold, knowing you have hours of back-breaking labor ahead. That hot cup of coffee, that was something to look forward to. Now, where did all this food come from? Well, most miners had to purchase their supplies from local merchants or traveling vendors. These merchants knew they had a captive audience, and prices were often exorbitant. Inflation was rampant in the gold fields. Something that might cost a few cents back east could cost several dollars in California. This inflated cost of living made it even harder for miners to actually strike it rich. Some miners tried to supplement their diet by hunting or fishing. Game animals like deer, rabbits, and squirrels were occasionally available, and rivers teemed with fish. But hunting took time and effort, time that could be spent mining, and fishing required the right equipment and a bit of luck. Besides, other miners also had the same idea, and the game could get scarce as time went on. So while it could be a welcome change from salt pork, it wasn't a reliable source of food. Gardening was another option, but it was a challenge. The soil in many mining areas was poor, and the growing season was short. Plus, you had to protect your garden from wildlife, and let's be honest, other hungry miners. Some enterprising individuals did manage to grow vegetables like potatoes, onions, and turnips, providing a valuable source of fresh produce, but it was the exception rather than the rule. Disease was also a constant concern when it came to food. Poor sanitation and lack of refrigeration meant that food could easily spoil, leading to illnesses like dysentery and scurvy. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was particularly prevalent because fresh fruits and vegetables were so scarce. The symptoms included fatigue, bleeding gums, and eventually death. Imagine working all day in the harsh environment while suffering from the effects of malnutrition. It was a brutal reality for many. Of course, some miners were more resourceful or more fortunate than others. Those who arrived early and established claims near fertile land had a distinct advantage, and those who had the capital to invest in supplies or transportation could afford a slightly better diet. But for the vast majority of miners, food was a constant worry, a daily reminder of the hardships they faced in their quest for gold. It was a life of basic sustenance, scarcity, and a constant struggle to keep body and soul together. So next time you're enjoying a delicious, well-balanced meal, take a moment to appreciate how easy we have it compared to those brave but often hungry souls who chased their dreams in the California gold fields. They endured so much, all for the hope of striking it rich and a decent meal. Alright, settle in now, because we're about to talk about something pretty fundamental to life in the gold fields: shelter. And let me tell you, it wasn't exactly glamping. You've probably seen the pictures, the romanticized images of sturdy log cabins nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills. And while those did exist, the reality for most miners was far more basic. Think survival mode, not home sweet home. Now imagine arriving in this wild landscape, maybe after months of travel, your pockets pretty much empty after paying for passage and supplies. The first thing you'd need, even before you thought about digging for gold, was a place to lay your head. And for the vast majority, that meant a tent. Yep, a simple canvas tent. These weren't the fancy weatherproofed tents we have today. These were often flimsy, hastily made things providing minimal protection from the elements. Think scorching sun during the day, freezing cold at night, and rain. Oh, the rain. Picture a downpour turning the ground to mud, seeping under the canvas, turning your meager belongings into a soggy mess. And the wind? A good gust could flatten your entire house in seconds. It wasn't glamorous, that's for sure. You see images of these tent cities springing up almost overnight, these sprawling collections of canvas shelters huddled together, hoping for some sort of comfort in numbers. Think about the sounds too. The constant flapping of canvas in the wind, the snores from your neighbor, the yipping of coyotes in the distance, all contributing to a pretty restless night's sleep. But hey, a tent was better than nothing, right? It offered some privacy, a barrier against the elements, and a place to store your few possessions. And for many, it was their only home for months, even years. As time went on, and if a miner had a bit of luck, or maybe some carpentry skills, they might try to upgrade their living situation. And that's where we get to the makeshift cabin part of the story. Now, these weren't exactly architectural masterpieces. These were cobbled together from whatever materials were available. Think roughly hewn logs, maybe some scavenged planks, branches, mud, anything that could provide some semblance of a solid wall. These cabins were often tiny, cramped spaces, maybe just big enough for a bunk, a small stove, and a few tools. And let's be honest, they weren't exactly airtight. Cracks and gaps were common, letting in drafts, insects, and the occasional rodent. The construction methods were, shall we say, creative. Miners would often use a technique called chinking, which involved filling the gaps between the logs with mud, clay, or even just scraps of fabric to try and keep the weather out. It wasn't always effective, but it was better than nothing. The roofs might be made of branches covered with dirt, or maybe some salvaged canvas. Again, not exactly luxurious. And then there was the issue of location. Most miners built their cabins as close to their claim as possible, which meant often perching them on steep hillsides, or along riverbanks prone to flooding. Practicality trumped comfort, you see. Time was money, and every minute spent walking to and from your claim was a minute not spent digging for gold. Inside these makeshift cabins, life was pretty Spartan. Furniture was usually homemade. A rough-hewn table, a stool, maybe a bunk bed if you were sharing the space with a partner. A stove was essential for cooking and heating, but fuel could be scarce and expensive. Hygiene was a constant challenge. Water was often contaminated, and bathing was a rare luxury. Add to that the lack of proper sanitation, and you had a recipe for disease and discomfort. Think about the constant dust and dirt, the lack of ventilation, the smell of sweat, wood smoke, and unwashed clothes. It wasn't exactly a five-star experience. These were tough men and women, enduring incredibly harsh conditions in the hope of striking it rich. One important thing to also keep in mind is community. While many might imagine miners isolated and alone, that's simply not true. They built these shelters close to one another. Not only did this provide some sense of security, but also, maybe more importantly, a sense of comfort and friendship with others going through the exact same difficulties. Evenings would be spent sharing stories, playing cards, maybe even a little music, all in the cramped confines of these makeshift homes. This sense of community was vital for survival, both physically and mentally. In conclusion, the reality of shelter in the goldfields was a far cry from the romanticized images we often see. It was a story of hardship, ingenuity, and resilience. From flimsy tents to cobbled-together cabins, miners made do with what they had, enduring incredibly challenging conditions in their pursuit of fortune. And while their homes might have been humble, they were also a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt and survive in the face of adversity. Now, try to imagine sleeping soundly in such a place. Okay, so you finally made it to California, maybe after months of grueling travel. You're ready to strike it rich, right? But hold on a second. Before you can even think about panning for gold, you need a place to well exist, and that's where boomtowns come in. Imagine a landscape practically overnight transformed from rolling hills or quiet forests into bustling, chaotic hubs of activity. These weren't your quaint, established villages. Boomtowns sprang up, often seemingly out of nowhere. The instant word got out about a gold strike, think instant cities, but with significantly less planning and, shall we say, slightly more questionable hygiene. These towns were driven by one thing, and one thing only, the promise of gold. As prospectors flooded in, eager to make their fortunes, businesses followed, catering to the needs and, frankly, the vices of this temporary population. General stores, saloons, gambling halls, and other establishments, we'll get to those later, popped up faster than you can say eureka. And I mean fast. We're talking about structures thrown together in a matter of days, sometimes just tents or hastily constructed wooden shacks. Forget zoning regulations or building codes. The priority was speed, not safety or aesthetics. These were purely functional spaces, designed to provide immediate shelter and services. Think of them as the pop-up stores of the 19th century. Only instead of selling limited edition sneakers, they were selling shovels, whiskey, and, well, opportunities. Now, what did these instant cities look like? Picture this: muddy streets churned up by constant foot traffic and wagons, lined with a chaotic mix of buildings. Canvas tents stood alongside rough-hewn wooden structures, often leaning precariously. Signage was haphazard, often hand-painted and barely legible, and the noise, the constant din of hammers, shouting, music, and the ever-present rumble of mining equipment. It was a sensory overload, a far cry from the peaceful countryside many miners had left behind. And the smells, oh the smells. A potent cocktail of unwashed bodies, animal waste, cooking fires, and the less than pleasant byproducts of mining. Let's just say it wasn't exactly a perfumery. These boomtowns were incredibly diverse, and I'm not just talking about ethnicity, though we'll get to that. You had your seasoned miners, your greenhorn prospectors, your merchants and businessmen, your gamblers and con artists, and of course a healthy dose of ladies of the night, all crammed together into a small space, all driven by the same feverish desire for wealth. The population of these towns could fluctuate wildly. A promising strike could cause a town to explode in size almost overnight. But equally quickly, if the gold ran out or a new, richer strike was discovered elsewhere, the town could just as easily be abandoned, leaving behind a ghost town of empty buildings and shattered dreams. Talk about fleeting. Think of places like Bodie, California, or Virginia City, Nevada. These were once thriving boomtowns, packed with thousands of people chasing their dreams. Now they stand as eerie reminders of the gold rush era, testaments to the boom and bust cycle that defined so many of these communities. Life in a boomtown wasn't for the faint of heart. It was rough, it was chaotic, and it could be dangerous. But it was also a place of incredible opportunity, a place where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. It was a microcosm of the American spirit, ambitious, restless, and always searching for something more. Now within these boomtowns, certain establishments became social hubs, defining the character of the place. The saloon, for example, was much more than just a place to grab a drink, though. Let's be honest, that was a big part of it. It was a meeting place, a news exchange, a place to gamble, and even sometimes a makeshift courtroom or town hall. The saloon owner was often a prominent figure in the community, holding sway over local affairs. Then you had the gambling halls, offering another avenue for miners to try their luck, and often lose their hard-earned gold. Faro, poker, and other games of chance were popular pastimes, providing a brief escape from the drudgery of mining. But these games were often rigged, and many a miner found himself quickly parted from his fortune. And of course, let's not forget the less reputable establishments. Prostitution flourished in boomtowns, offering another form of entertainment and companionship for the predominantly male population. While often overlooked in historical accounts, these businesses played a significant role in the social and economic life of these communities. It's important to remember that boomtowns weren't just about gold and money, they were also about people from all walks of life, drawn together by a common dream. They were about community, about survival, and about the enduring human desire for a better life, even if that life was lived in a muddy, chaotic, and often lawless environment. It was truly the Wild West in every sense of the word, a place where anything was possible, and where fortunes could be made and lost with the turn of a card or the swing of a pickaxe. The image of the solitary gold prospector, panning for riches alone against the backdrop of the untamed wilderness, is deeply ingrained in our collective understanding of the gold rush. And while that certainly existed, the lone wolf scratching out a living, the reality for many miners was far more communal. In fact, the success, even the survival, of these individuals often hinged on the bonds they forged and the support they offered one another. Think about it for a second. You've traveled thousands of miles, often leaving behind everything you know. You arrive in a strange, unforgiving land. You're surrounded by unfamiliar faces, all driven by the same relentless pursuit, gold. But gold is fickle, and the work is brutal. Loneliness, despair, and even danger are constant companions. In such a landscape, finding common ground, building trust, and offering a helping hand wasn't just a nicety, it was essential. Mining claims, especially in the early days, were often worked collectively. A group of miners, sometimes as few as 2 or 3, sometimes a dozen or more, would pool their resources, their labor, and their knowledge. This wasn't always a utopian ideal, of course. Disagreements over strategy, distribution of profits, and even just personality clashes were inevitable. But the benefits of cooperation often outweighed the potential for conflict. Imagine trying to construct a sluice box on your own, felling the trees, hauling the lumber, crafting the intricate workings. It's a monumental task for a single individual. But with a group working together, the project becomes manageable. Shared knowledge and experience also played a crucial role. A miner who had worked in the copper mines of Cornwall, for instance, might have invaluable insights into techniques for excavating ore that others simply wouldn't possess. Sharing these skills benefited the entire group. Beyond the practical advantages, the social bonds formed within these mining partnerships provided a vital emotional lifeline. These men, and sometimes women, though less frequently, were far from home, often missing their families and the comforts of civilization. The shared hardships, the daily struggles, and the constant uncertainty created a sense of camaraderie that transcended mere business arrangements. These miners became a surrogate family for each other. Even outside of formal partnerships, a spirit of mutual aid often prevailed. If a miner fell ill or was injured in an accident, and injuries were incredibly common in the dangerous conditions of the mines, his fellow miners would rally to support him. They would bring food, tend to his wounds, and even work his claim in his absence to ensure that he didn't lose everything. This sense of community extended beyond individual acts of kindness. Mining camps and boom towns, despite their reputation for lawlessness, often developed their own informal systems of support. Miners' organizations, mutual aid societies, and even just impromptu gatherings at the local saloon served as forums for sharing information, resolving disputes, and providing a sense of belonging. Think of it as an early form of social safety net. These organizations would collect dues or contributions from their members and use the funds to provide assistance to those in need. They might offer financial support to a miner who had lost his tools in a fire, pay for medical care for a sick member, or even provide for the families of miners who had died in accidents. The importance of these support networks cannot be overstated. They provided a buffer against the inherent instability and uncertainty of life in the gold fields. They offered a sense of security in a world where security was scarce, and they helped to foster a sense of collective identity among people who had come from all corners of the globe, all united by the common goal of striking it rich. Of course, the idealized image of brotherly love and unwavering support is not the whole story. Competition for resources, prejudice against certain ethnic groups, and simple human greed could all undermine these bonds of community. But even in the face of these challenges, the prevalence of mutual aid and cooperation speaks to the fundamental human need for connection and support, especially in times of adversity. So when we think of the gold rush, let's remember to look beyond the romanticized image of the lone prospector and appreciate the vital role that community and camaraderie played in the lives of the men and women who risked everything to chase their dreams in the California gold fields. These bonds weren't just nice to have, they were often the difference between success and failure, between survival and despair. They were the threads that wove together the social fabric of the gold rush era, and they remind us that even in the most individualistic of pursuits, we are all ultimately reliant on one another. Because in a land of dreams and dangers, sometimes the only gold that truly matters is the gold of human connection. All right, settle in, friend, because we're about to wade into the murkier side of the gold rush, a place where the glint of gold often overshadowed the glimmer of justice. Law and order, well, let's just say it was more of a suggestion than a steadfast rule in those early boom towns. Imagine a place exploding with people practically overnight, all chasing the same shimmering dream, often fueled by desperation and, let's be honest, a fair bit of greed. Now, try to enforce laws in that kind of environment. It's complicated. The existing structures of governance simply couldn't keep pace with the sheer velocity of the population boom. Think about it. You've got thousands of people flooding into remote areas that just weeks before might have been sparsely populated wilderness. Sheriffs, judges, courthouses, they were either non-existent or hopelessly outnumbered and under-resourced. Sacramento, for example, struggled immensely. This vacuum of authority inevitably led to problems. Lots of problems. Claim jumping was rampant. You'd spend weeks, months even, slaving away, carving into the earth, finally striking a promising vein, only to find someone else, maybe a group of someones, had decided it was now theirs. Good luck proving otherwise when the nearest legal authority was a stagecoach ride away, and even then their allegiance might be flexible. Theft, of course, was another constant companion. Gold dust was essentially untraceable currency, a shiny temptation for anyone down on their luck, or just plain unscrupulous. Stagecoach robberies became almost commonplace, with bandits preying on shipments of gold heading back to civilization. And sadly, violence was never far behind. Disputes over claims, gambling debts, even petty arguments could quickly escalate into deadly confrontations. Now, into this chaotic mix steps a figure synonymous with the Wild West, the vigilante. When the law couldn't or wouldn't act, these self-appointed guardians of justice took matters into their own hands. Driven by a desire to protect their communities and property, vigilante groups sprang up in many of the gold mining towns. They organized, held their own trials, and delivered their own brand of justice, often swift and often final. It's easy to romanticize these figures, to see them as noble heroes battling against the forces of lawlessness. But the reality, as always, was far more nuanced. While some vigilante groups genuinely aimed to restore order, others were little more than mobs, fueled by prejudice and personal vendettas. Justice became subjective, and the line between lawman and outlaw became dangerously blurred. The San Francisco Vigilance Committee of 1856 is a prime example. Frustrated by corruption and perceived incompetence within the city's government, a group of citizens formed a committee to root out what they saw as criminal elements. They held trials, executed several individuals, and effectively took control of the city for a period. While they did manage to quell some of the overt lawlessness, their actions also raised serious questions about due process and the rule of law. Were they heroes or simply another form of mob rule? It's a debate that continues to this day. The actions of the San Francisco Vigilance Committee and others like it highlight the complex moral landscape of the gold rush. When the established legal system failed, people felt compelled to take action, but the consequences of that action were often unpredictable and far-reaching. Think about the psychology of it all. You're isolated, far from home, surrounded by strangers, all competing for the same limited resource. Trust is a precious commodity, easily broken. The potential for conflict is always simmering beneath the surface. And when you feel like you can't rely on the authorities to protect you, the temptation to take matters into your own hands becomes incredibly strong. The lack of formal law enforcement also fostered a culture of self-reliance and personal responsibility. Miners learned to defend their claims, their property, and themselves. Carrying a weapon became commonplace, not just for protection against wildlife, but also against other humans. The Colt revolver, in particular, became a symbol of the era, a tool for both survival and intimidation. Of course, this environment didn't just affect the miners. Businesses too had to adapt. Storekeepers, saloon owners, even doctors all had to navigate this landscape of uncertainty and potential violence. They often had to act as de facto law enforcement, mediating disputes, protecting their businesses, and ensuring the safety of their customers. So as you can see, the notion of law and order during the gold rush was a fluid, ever-evolving concept. It was a patchwork of formal legal structures, vigilante justice, and individual self-reliance, all struggling to maintain a semblance of order in a society undergoing unprecedented upheaval. It was a wild, chaotic, and often brutal time, where the pursuit of gold could easily lead down a path of lawlessness and violence. And that, my friend, is a far cry from the sanitized version we often see in the movies. While popular imagination often pictures gold rush miners as rugged, bearded men, the reality is that women played a vital, if often overlooked, role in shaping the communities and fortunes of this era. Let's move past the simplistic stereotypes of saloon girls and delve into the diverse experiences of women during the gold rush. For many, the journey west was a family affair. Wives often accompanied their husbands, enduring the same grueling travel conditions, the cramped wagons, the disease, the sheer exhaustion, with perhaps even greater resilience. Imagine leaving behind your home, your family, everything familiar, for a chance at a better life, all while caring for children and managing limited resources. These women weren't passive passengers, they were essential partners, contributing in countless ways. Upon arrival in the goldfields, their responsibilities didn't diminish, far from it. While some assisted directly in mining operations, yes, you heard that right, women wielding pickaxes and panning for gold alongside the men, most focused on establishing a semblance of domesticity in a decidedly undomestic environment. They transformed rudimentary shelters into homes, however humble. They cooked, cleaned, sewed, and nursed the sick, providing essential comforts and care in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. Think about it. These weren't easy tasks. Resources were scarce. Clean water was often hard to find. Medical care was rudimentary, if available at all. Women relied on their resourcefulness, their ingenuity, and their sheer determination to create a stable and nurturing environment for their families. Their contributions were vital for the survival and well-being of these nascent communities. But women weren't just homemakers. Many saw the gold rush as an opportunity to forge their own paths, to become independent and financially secure. They recognized needs in the boom towns and capitalized on them, becoming entrepreneurs in their own right. Laundries, for instance, were a crucial service in the gold fields. Miners, constantly covered in dirt and grime, were willing to pay a premium for clean clothes. Women, particularly Chinese and Mexican immigrants, often established laundries, providing a valuable service and earning a respectable income. These businesses were often incredibly labor-intensive, requiring long hours of washing, drying, and ironing, but they offered a pathway to economic independence. Boarding houses were another common venture. Providing lodging and meals for miners was a lucrative business, especially in areas where housing was scarce. Women who ran boarding houses not only earned money, but also created a sense of community, offering a welcoming space for weary travelers and lonely miners. They became de facto matriarchs of these makeshift families, providing a sense of home and connection in a transient environment. Then there were the shopkeepers. Women opened stores selling everything from provisions and mining supplies to clothing and household goods. Their business acumen was often underestimated, but they proved to be shrewd and successful entrepreneurs, contributing significantly to the economic development of the boom towns. They understood the needs of the community and catered to them, building thriving businesses and establishing themselves as respected members of society. And let's not forget the entertainers. While the stereotype of the saloon girl is often sensationalized, the reality is that women performers, singers, dancers, actresses, brought much-needed entertainment and cultural enrichment to the gold fields. They provided a respite from the hard labor and the loneliness, offering a glimpse of beauty and artistry in a rugged world. These women were often talented and ambitious, using their skills to earn a living and to bring joy to others. Beyond these common roles, some women pursued even more unconventional paths. Some became teachers, educating the children of the gold rush communities. Others worked as journalists, documenting the events of the era and providing a voice for the voiceless. A few even became lawyers or doctors, defying societal expectations and paving the way for future generations of women in these professions. The story of women in the gold rush is a story of resilience, resourcefulness, and entrepreneurship. It's a story that challenges the traditional narrative of the era, revealing the vital contributions of women in shaping the communities and economies of the gold fields. It's a reminder that history is never simple, and that the experiences of women, often marginalized, are essential to understanding the full picture. Their courage, their determination, and their unwavering spirit are a testament to the strength and adaptability of the human spirit in the face of adversity. So next time you think of the gold rush, remember the women, the wives, the mothers, the businesswomen, the entertainers, the teachers, who helped build a new world in the American West. They were much more than just background characters, they were integral to the story. The California Gold Rush, a period romanticized in countless stories, wasn't just about individual prospectors striking it rich. It was a melting pot, or perhaps more accurately, a pressure cooker of cultures, ethnicities, and languages. People from all corners of the globe flocked to California, each with their own dreams of finding fortune in the Golden Hills. But this diversity, while adding a vibrant texture to the Gold Rush era, also became a breeding ground for tensions and conflicts that often get glossed over in the popular narrative. Think about it. You've got Americans from the East Coast already feeling a sense of entitlement to the land. Then you have Europeans, the British, the French, the Germans, the Italians, each bringing their own traditions and work ethics. And let's not forget the Latin Americans, particularly those from Mexico and Chile, who already had a presence in California and a working knowledge of mining techniques. Add to this mix the Chinese, who arrived in droves seeking economic opportunity, and the indigenous populations who were, of course, the original inhabitants of the land and watched as their world was torn apart. It was a volatile mix, to say the least. The Chinese in particular faced intense discrimination. They were often seen as outsiders, different, and therefore a threat. They were subjected to discriminatory laws, such as the foreign miners' tax, which specifically targeted them and other non-American miners. This tax, often unfairly enforced, forced many Chinese miners out of the more promising claims and into less profitable areas. Imagine working tirelessly all day, sifting through dirt and gravel, only to have a significant portion of your meager earnings taken away simply because of where you came from. Beyond the legal discrimination, the Chinese also faced rampant prejudice and violence. They were often blamed for economic downturns, accused of unfair competition, and subjected to physical attacks and harassment. Their camps were sometimes raided, their property destroyed, and their lives threatened. Sadly, instances of outright massacres where entire Chinese communities were brutally murdered were not uncommon. These acts of violence, often fueled by racism and greed, are a stark reminder of the darker side of the gold rush. The Latin Americans also faced significant challenges. While they had a historical claim to the land and often possessed valuable mining skills, they were frequently targeted by Anglo-American miners who resented their presence and perceived them as competition. The language barrier further exacerbated these tensions, making it difficult for them to defend themselves against unfair treatment. They too were often subjected to violence and intimidation, forced off their claims, and denied their fair share of the opportunities. Even among European miners, tensions could run high. Nationalistic sentiments often played a role, with different groups competing for the best claims and resources. Arguments over mining techniques, water rights, and even just differing cultural norms could quickly escalate into heated conflicts. It wasn't always about race, sometimes it was simply about survival in a cutthroat environment. The indigenous populations, of course, bore the brunt of the gold rush. Their traditional lands were overrun by miners, their resources depleted, and their way of life destroyed. They were often driven off their ancestral territories, subjected to violence, and decimated by diseases brought by the newcomers. The gold rush marked a tragic chapter in the history of Native Americans in California, a period of displacement, suffering, and immense loss. It's a grim, sad chapter of the story to remember. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom. There were instances of cooperation and camaraderie between different groups of miners. Sometimes, necessity forced people to put aside their differences and work together. Miners from different backgrounds might pool their resources, share their knowledge, or simply offer each other support in the face of adversity. But these moments of unity were often overshadowed by the prevailing tensions and conflicts. The gold rush, in essence, was a microcosm of a rapidly changing world, a world where different cultures clashed, competed, and sometimes found ways to coexist. It was a period of immense opportunity, but also of immense inequality and injustice. Understanding the ethnic diversity and the tensions that arose from it is crucial to understanding the full and complex story of the California Gold Rush, a story far more nuanced and complicated than the simple narrative of individual success and instant wealth. It was really a messy, chaotic human story, and that's perhaps the most interesting part of all. The Gold Rush. We've talked about the back-breaking work, the relentless pursuit of fortune, and the sheer grit it took to survive in those boom towns. But there's another, often overlooked, aspect of a miner's life that cast a long, dark shadow: the constant threat of disease and injury. Imagine this. You're living in a makeshift camp, hygiene is practically non-existent, and your body is pushed to its absolute limits every single day. It's the perfect breeding ground for illness. And trust me, illness wasn't picky. One of the biggest killers was dysentery, or the bloody flux, as they charmingly called it back then. Think severe diarrhea, stomach cramps, fever, basically a one-way ticket to dehydration, and in many cases death. It spread like wildfire through contaminated water and food, and sanitation in the mining camps. Well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a priority. Miners would often drink from the same streams they used for, well, everything else. It's a wonder anyone survived at all. Then there was cholera, another waterborne disease that could kill within hours. It's hard to fathom the sheer terror that must have gripped these communities when cholera swept through. Imagine watching your friends and neighbors succumb to a rapid, agonizing illness, knowing that you could be next. And it wasn't just waterborne diseases. Respiratory illnesses were rampant too. Pneumonia, influenza, and even good old-fashioned colds spread quickly through crowded tents and poorly ventilated cabins, especially during the harsh winters. The constant exposure to dust and damp conditions weakened the lungs, making miners even more vulnerable. But wait, there's more. Scurvy, the bane of any long journey without access to fresh fruits and vegetables. The lack of vitamin C led to bleeding gums, tooth loss, fatigue, and a whole host of other unpleasant symptoms. It seems so simple to prevent now, but back then, fresh produce was a luxury few could afford. Salt pork and beans just weren't cutting it in the nutrition department. And speaking of lack of resources, medical care was rudimentary, to put it mildly. Doctors were few and far between, and their methods were often based on outdated theories. Bloodletting was still a common practice, and surgery, well, let's just say you'd better hope you didn't need it. Home remedies were the norm, often relying on herbal concoctions and folk medicine. Some of these remedies might have been effective, but many were likely useless or even harmful. It was a gamble, and your life was the stake. Now, let's not forget the injuries. Mining was incredibly dangerous work. Rockfalls, cave-ins, explosions. The risks were everywhere. A misplaced swing of a pickaxe could result in a serious wound, and a fall down a mine shaft could be fatal. Even seemingly minor injuries could become life-threatening due to infection. Remember, we're talking about a time before antibiotics. A simple cut could quickly turn septic, leading to amputation or even death. And then there was the back-breaking labor itself. Miners suffered from all sorts of musculoskeletal problems, strained backs, aching joints, and repetitive stress injuries. Imagine spending hours each day hunched over, digging and sifting through dirt and gravel. It takes a huge toll on the body, and there was little to no opportunity for rest or recovery. The constant exposure to the elements also took its toll. Heat stroke in the summer and hypothermia in the winter were very real threats. Miners were constantly battling the extremes of the California climate, often with inadequate clothing and shelter. Mental health was also a significant, though often unspoken, issue. The isolation, the constant pressure to find gold, the uncertainty of the future, it all took a toll on the mind. Depression, anxiety, and even suicide were undoubtedly more common than we realize. And to add another layer of difficulty, substance abuse was rampant. Alcohol and opium were readily available, offering a temporary escape from the hardships of mining life. But of course, these substances only exacerbated the problems, leading to addiction, violence, and further health issues. So you see, the life of a gold rush miner was far from glamorous. It was a constant struggle against disease, injury, and the harsh realities of the environment. It's a testament to their resilience and determination that so many were able to endure such difficult conditions. While the dream of striking it rich drove them forward, the shadow of illness and injury was a constant companion, a stark reminder of the risks they faced every single day. It's a somber thought, isn't it? Just how fragile their lives were amidst the pursuit of fortune. All right, settle in, friend. Let's talk about the cold, hard cash of the gold rush, or rather the lack of it for most folks. Because while the image we often have is one of instant riches, the financial realities were a whole lot more complicated. The cost of living in these boom towns was absolutely astronomical, truly unbelievable. Think about it. Everything had to be hauled in, often over incredibly difficult terrain. We're talking mountains, rivers, vast distances, all of that added to the price tag. So what did things actually cost? Well, imagine paying several dollars for a single egg. Sounds crazy, right? But that was reality. Flour, beans, coffee, all the staples were similarly inflated. We're talking prices 10, 20, sometimes even 50 times higher than what you'd pay back east. And don't even get me started on things like tools and mining equipment. A pickaxe that might cost $1 or $2 in a regular town could easily set you back 10 or 15 in a place like San Francisco or Sacramento. And then there's the rent. Finding a place to live, even a tiny little shack or a shared tent, was a major expense. Landlords knew they had the upper hand, and they weren't afraid to take advantage of it. Some miners ended up spending almost everything they earned just on keeping a roof or a canvas sheet over their heads. It was a vicious cycle, really. You needed money to make money, but just surviving in these places was draining your resources faster than you could replenish them. Now you might be thinking, okay, so everything was expensive, but if you struck it rich, it wouldn't matter, right? Well, that's where the elusive nature of wealth part comes in, because even if you did find a decent amount of gold, holding onto it was another challenge altogether. Temptation was everywhere. Gambling saloons popped up like mushrooms after a rain, promising instant fortunes but more often delivering crushing losses. And don't forget about the swindlers and con artists. These boom towns were a breeding ground for shady characters, looking to take advantage of naive or desperate miners. Fake gold claims, rigged games, inflated investments, the list goes on. It was incredibly easy to get tricked out of your hard-earned gold dust, leaving you right back where you started, or even worse off. The lure of quick riches also led many miners into debt. They might borrow money to buy better equipment, hoping to increase their yields, or they might take out loans to finance their journey to the gold fields in the first place. If they didn't strike it rich quickly, they could find themselves buried under a mountain of debt, with no way to pay it back. It was a constant source of stress and anxiety for many, and even if you managed to avoid the gamblers and swindlers, simply exchanging your gold for usable currency could be a risky proposition. Not all gold was created equal. Some was purer than others, and the value fluctuated wildly. Unscrupulous assayers, those who tested the gold, could easily cheat you out of a significant portion of its worth. It was a complex system, and it was easy to get taken advantage of if you weren't careful. What's really sad is that the people who often profited most from the gold rush weren't the miners themselves, but the merchants and business owners who catered to them. They were the ones who could consistently charge exorbitant prices for goods and services, knowing that the miners had no other choice. They were essentially skimming the cream off the top, leaving the miners to take all the risks and endure all the hardships. It paints a picture of a reality much different from the romanticized view of the gold rush. It was less about striking it rich and more about struggling to survive. It was a constant uphill battle against inflation, debt, and the ever-present threat of being swindled out of what little you had. Most miners ended up with very little to show for their efforts, after months or even years of back-breaking labor. So while a few individuals certainly did make fortunes, the vast majority of those who flocked to California during the gold rush found themselves facing a much harsher reality. They were caught in a financial trap, working tirelessly just to stay afloat, with the elusive dream of wealth always just out of reach. It's a humbling reminder that even in the midst of great opportunity, there are often significant barriers and hidden costs that can prevent most people from achieving their dreams. And sometimes the only ones getting rich are the ones selling the shovels. Makes you think, doesn't it? Are the gold fields, a place where fortunes were made and lost faster than a card sharp could fleece a greenhorn. We've talked about the back-breaking work, the endless days of sifting through dirt and gravel, the constant battle against the elements. But all that toil, all that hardship, it boiled down to one thing: luck. And luck, as any miner worth his salt will tell you, is a fickle mistress. Imagine this: you've spent weeks, maybe even months, scratching out a claim. You've endured the heat, the flies, the isolation. You've eaten beans until you think you'll turn into one. You've dreamed of gold, dreamed of riches, dreamed of a life beyond the dirt and grime. And then, one day, eureka! You strike it rich. Not just a few flakes, not just a small pocket, but a veritable river of gold. Nuggets the size of your fist, veins of shimmering ore stretching as far as the eye can see. Suddenly, you're not just a miner anymore, you're a somebody. You can buy the finest clothes, the best food, maybe even a seat at the saloon's poker table. You're living the dream, sharing drinks, making friends, getting your picture taken for the local paper. Everyone wants to be your friend. Everyone is eager to tell you their woes, hoping you will toss some gold their way. You're living high, and the possibilities seem endless. Stories like that fueled the gold rush. They were whispered around campfires, printed in newspapers back east, and exaggerated with every telling. They were the siren song that lured thousands upon thousands to California, promising them a chance at a better life. But friend, for every story of instant wealth, there were 100 tales of crushing disappointment. Because the truth is, gold was rare, and finding it was almost entirely dependent on being in the right place at the right time. You could work just as hard as the next guy, maybe even harder, and come up empty-handed. You could spend your life savings on equipment, supplies, and travel, only to find that your claim was barren, a patch of dirt that gave and gave nothing. Imagine the opposite scenario now. The claim next to yours yields a king's ransom, and yours is dry. You watch as others prosper, building businesses and enjoying their finds. Each day they mine, you sink deeper into debt. Your dreams begin to fade, and the reality of your situation becomes inescapable. You start selling off pieces of your equipment to make ends meet. The beans are gone, the friends are too. The sad reality is that most miners didn't strike it rich. They toiled and struggled, barely eking out a living. They faced sickness, injury, and constant financial uncertainty. Many ended up poorer than when they started, forced to sell their belongings and return home empty-handed, or worse, destitute. They went home to a world of "I told you so." And even for those who did find gold, the journey wasn't always smooth. The cost of living in the gold fields was astronomical. Prices for everything, from food to tools to lodging, were inflated to ridiculous levels. A single egg could cost $1, and that was $1 back then, with real buying power. Many a miner squandered their newfound wealth on gambling, drinking, or other vices. Boomtowns, as we've discussed, were rife with temptation, and it was easy to get caught up in the fast-paced, often reckless lifestyle. You could win big at poker one night and lose it all the next. The lure of instant riches was a powerful drug, and many became addicted to the thrill of the chase, even when it meant throwing away their hard-earned fortune. And there were the con men, the swindlers, the claim jumpers, always on the lookout for an opportunity to take advantage of unsuspecting miners. They sold worthless land, peddled faulty equipment, and cheated at cards. They preyed on the vulnerable, the desperate, and the naive, adding another layer of risk to an already precarious situation. So while the image of the wealthy gold miner is romantic and appealing, it's important to remember that it was the exception, not the rule. The vast majority of those who flocked to California seeking their fortune found only hardship, disappointment, and the cold, hard reality of the boom and bust cycle. The gold rush was a gamble, a high-stakes game with incredibly long odds. Some won, yes, but many more lost. And their stories, though less glamorous, are just as important in understanding what life in the gold fields truly looked like. It's a reminder that success is never guaranteed, and that even in the land of opportunity, hard work and perseverance are often not enough. Sometimes, you just need a little luck. Alright friends, let's gently turn our attention to a deeply troubling aspect of the gold rush, a side of the story often overshadowed by tales of fortune and adventure, the devastating impact on Native American populations. It's a difficult chapter, but an absolutely crucial one for understanding the full picture of this era. Before the first pickaxe struck gold-laden earth, California was home to a rich tapestry of Native American cultures, each with its own unique language, customs, and traditions, deeply interwoven with the land. These weren't just scattered settlements, but complex societies that had thrived for millennia, living in balance with the natural world. But that balance was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. The discovery of gold, well, it acted like a giant wrecking ball aimed directly at Native American life. The sheer influx of prospectors, we're talking hundreds of thousands, fundamentally altered the landscape. These newcomers weren't just looking for gold, they were looking for land, resources, and a place to build their new lives. And they often did so with a blatant disregard for the rights and well-being of the people who already called California home. One of the most immediate and devastating effects was, without a doubt, displacement. Mining operations, towns and farms sprung up seemingly overnight, encroaching upon Native American territories and disrupting their traditional ways of life. Hunting grounds were destroyed, sacred sites desecrated, and access to essential resources like water and food was cut off. Imagine suddenly finding your home, your livelihood, and your very identity under siege, all for the sake of a shiny metal. And the impact wasn't just environmental. The gold rush brought with it diseases to which Native Americans had no immunity: measles, smallpox, influenza. These illnesses swept through communities like wildfire, decimating populations that were already vulnerable. Imagine facing such a wave of sickness with no access to modern medicine and no understanding of how to combat it. It was truly a catastrophic situation. Sadly, the displacement and disease were often accompanied by outright violence. As competition for land and resources intensified, conflicts between miners and Native Americans became increasingly common. And tragically, these conflicts were rarely fair. Miners, often armed and organized, frequently attacked Native American villages, perpetrating unspeakable atrocities. The state government, unfortunately, did little to protect Native Americans and in some cases actively encouraged violence against them. Laws were passed that effectively legalized the seizure of Native American lands, and bounties were even offered for the scalps of Native Americans. Just pause and think about the horror of that for a moment. The very people who should have been protecting these vulnerable communities were instead incentivizing their murder. These acts of violence, whether sanctioned by the state or carried out by individuals, resulted in a staggering loss of life. Historians estimate that the Native American population of California plummeted from around 150,000 before the gold rush to just 30,000 by 1870. That's an absolutely heartbreaking decline, a testament to the brutality and injustice of this period. Beyond the physical violence, there was also a systematic effort to erase Native American culture. Children were often forcibly removed from their families and placed in boarding schools where they were forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing their traditions. This deliberate attempt to assimilate Native Americans into white society was another form of violence, stripping them of their identity. Now, it's important to remember that Native Americans weren't passive victims in all of this. They resisted in various ways, defending their lands, negotiating treaties though these were often broken, and fighting for their rights. Their resilience in the face of such overwhelming odds is truly inspiring. There were also individuals, both Native American and non-Native American, who spoke out against the injustices being committed, but their voices were often drowned out by the prevailing attitudes of the time. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of periods, there are always glimmers of hope and acts of courage. The legacy of the gold rush on Native American populations is a painful and enduring one. The displacement, violence, disease, and cultural destruction of this era had profound and lasting consequences for Native American communities in California. It's a history that we must acknowledge and understand if we are to truly grapple with the complexities of the gold rush and its impact on the American West. Acknowledging this history also means recognizing the ongoing struggles faced by Native American communities today. The trauma of the gold rush era continues to affect generations, and many Native American communities still grapple with issues of poverty, discrimination, and cultural preservation. So, as we continue our exploration of the gold rush, let's remember the human cost of this era, the devastating impact on the people who were already here. By acknowledging this difficult history, we can honor the resilience of Native American communities and work towards a more just and equitable future. It's a somber note, I know, but an important one to reflect on before we move forward. Alright, so we've talked about the dreams and the struggles, the boom towns and the backbreaking labor of the gold rush. But there's a darker side to all that glittering gold, a side that doesn't shine quite so brightly. We're talking about the environmental consequences, the lasting damage that gold mining practices inflicted on the land, and honestly, it's a story that needs to be told. Imagine California before the gold rush, vast, untouched wilderness, pristine rivers teeming with fish, forests stretching as far as the eye could see. It was a place of incredible natural beauty. Now picture those same landscapes after just a few short years of intense gold mining activity. The contrast is, well, heartbreaking. One of the biggest culprits was hydraulic mining. This involved using high-pressure water cannons to blast away entire hillsides, literally washing the earth away to get at the gold underneath. Think of it like taking a garden hose and then scaling it up to something that could move mountains. It was incredibly effective at extracting gold, no doubt, but the environmental cost was catastrophic. All that blasted away sediment, rocks, and debris, what we now call slickens, ended up downstream. Rivers became choked with silt, turning crystal clear waters into muddy brown sludge. These massive amounts of sediment smothered fish, spawning grounds, decimated aquatic life, and completely disrupted entire ecosystems. It wasn't just the fish that suffered, animals that depended on those rivers for water and food struggled as well. And it wasn't just the rivers directly impacted by the mining operations. The sediment traveled for miles, eventually reaching the Sacramento Valley and San Francisco Bay. This caused widespread flooding, damaged farmland, and even altered the course of rivers. Imagine being a farmer, watching your crops get buried under layers of silt, or seeing your land completely washed away. It was a devastating blow to many communities. Beyond the immediate impact on rivers and land, hydraulic mining also had long-term consequences for water quality. The exposed earth was now vulnerable to erosion, meaning that sediment continued to wash into rivers for decades, even after the mining operations had ceased. And speaking of erosion, the hillsides that were blasted away never really recovered. They were left as barren landscapes, scarred and unstable. These areas were prone to landslides and further erosion, creating a cycle of environmental degradation that's still visible in some parts of California today. Now, hydraulic mining wasn't the only problem. Think about the other methods used to extract gold: placer mining, hard rock mining. All these activities had an impact. Placer mining, which involved sifting through riverbeds for gold, disturbed the delicate balance of the aquatic environment. Miners often diverted entire rivers, disrupting natural flow patterns and impacting fish migration. The use of mercury to separate gold from other materials introduced a highly toxic substance into the ecosystem. Mercury is a neurotoxin, meaning it can damage the nervous system, and it can accumulate in the food chain, posing a serious threat to both wildlife and humans. Hard rock mining, which involved digging deep into the earth to extract gold-bearing ore, created massive amounts of waste rock. This waste rock often contained heavy metals and other pollutants that could leach into the surrounding soil and water, contaminating drinking water sources and harming plant and animal life. It's important to remember that these miners, by and large, weren't intentionally trying to destroy the environment. They were driven by the allure of gold, the promise of wealth, and the desperate need to survive. They often lacked the knowledge or understanding of the long-term consequences of their actions. Environmental awareness just wasn't what it is today. But that doesn't excuse the damage that was done. The gold rush serves as a stark reminder of the importance of responsible resource management and the need to consider the environmental impact of human activities. It's a lesson that we continue to learn and grapple with today as we face new environmental challenges. Think about it. The landscape of California was forever altered. What was once a pristine wilderness was transformed into a scarred and degraded landscape, a testament to the power of human ambition and the destructive potential of unchecked greed. It took decades, and in some cases centuries, for the environment to begin to recover. And in some areas, the damage is still visible today. The ghost towns we see scattered across the landscape are not just relics of a bygone era, they are also reminders of the environmental costs of the gold rush. So as we reflect on the gold rush, let's not forget the environmental consequences. Let's remember the rivers that were choked with silt, the hillsides that were blasted away, and the ecosystems that were disrupted. And let's learn from the mistakes of the past so that we can build a more sustainable future. Alright, settle in, friends. After a long day of back-breaking work, what did a gold rush miner actually do to unwind? The image of constant toil and hardship, while accurate for the most part, doesn't paint the whole picture. Even with the relentless pursuit of gold, miners still carved out moments, however brief, for recreation and entertainment. It was a vital part of surviving the mental and emotional strain of this demanding life. Think about it. You're living far from home, surrounded by strangers, dealing with disappointment and danger on a daily basis. You need an outlet, and while options were limited, the ingenuity and spirit of these individuals shone through in the ways they found to relax and connect with each other. Now, the most common form of entertainment, unsurprisingly, revolved around the saloon. More than just a place to wet your whistle, saloons were the social hubs of boomtowns. They offered a refuge from the dust, the cold, and the loneliness. A shot of whiskey, often of questionable quality, mind you, could momentarily ease the aches and pains, both physical and mental. Card games like poker and faro were immensely popular, offering a chance to gamble away your earnings, or, if Lady Luck was on your side, to win big. Of course, these games often attracted their fair share of shady characters, and arguments could quickly escalate into brawls. The sound of piano music, though sometimes off-key, filled the air, creating a lively, if chaotic, atmosphere. Saloons also frequently hosted dances and other performances, offering a glimpse of civilization in the midst of the wilderness. Speaking of performances, traveling entertainers were a welcome sight in mining camps. Actors, singers, musicians, and even circus performers would make their way to these remote locations, bringing with them a taste of the outside world. These shows might take place in makeshift theaters, sometimes just a stage erected in a saloon, or even outdoors, and offered a temporary escape from the drudgery of mining. Imagine the excitement building as news spread that a troupe was arriving. For a few hours, miners could forget about their troubles and be transported to another time and place. Minstrel shows, although problematic by modern standards, were also common, reflecting the racial biases of the era. Beyond the saloons and traveling shows, miners found entertainment in more homespun activities. Storytelling was a popular pastime. Gathered around a campfire, after a long day, miners would share tales of their past lives, their hopes for the future, and of course their gold mining experiences, both the successes and the failures. These stories helped to build camaraderie and create a sense of shared experience. Singing was another common form of entertainment. Popular songs of the day, as well as traditional folk tunes, would echo through the canyons as miners worked or relaxed around their camps. Then, whenever possible, miners would organize their own athletic competitions and games. Things like foot races, wrestling matches, and even impromptu boxing matches were common ways to blow off steam and test their physical prowess. These events were often accompanied by betting and friendly rivalry, adding to the excitement. Holidays, like the 4th of July, were celebrated with particular enthusiasm, with parades, speeches, and plenty of food and drink. These celebrations served as important reminders of home and helped to foster a sense of national identity in this diverse and often transient population. The newspapers that sprang up in mining towns, however rudimentary, played a crucial role in providing news and entertainment. They published local news, advertisements, and even literary pieces, helping to connect miners to the wider world. Reading became a popular pastime, especially during the long winter months when mining activities were often curtailed. It was a lifeline to what was happening beyond their immediate surroundings. In some communities, miners even formed their own literary societies and debating clubs. These groups provided a forum for intellectual discussion and allowed miners to engage with ideas and express their opinions. It might sound surprising, but there was a real thirst for knowledge and self-improvement amongst these individuals, even amidst the harsh realities of the gold rush. Of course, it's important to acknowledge that not all forms of recreation were wholesome. Gambling, drinking, and prostitution were rampant in many mining towns, leading to social problems and moral decay. These vices offered a temporary escape from hardship, but they often came at a steep price. Life in the gold rush could be incredibly lonely, and some miners turned to these activities as a way to cope with their isolation. Ultimately, the recreational activities of gold rush miners reveal a lot about their resilience, their ingenuity, and their desire for connection. They were ordinary people placed in extraordinary circumstances, and they found ways to create moments of joy and community amidst the hardship and uncertainty. It's a reminder that even in the most challenging environments, the human spirit finds a way to thrive, to connect, and to seek out moments of light in the darkness. So the next time you picture a gold rush miner, don't just imagine them toiling away with a pickaxe. Picture them gathered around a campfire, sharing stories, singing songs, and finding solace in the company of their fellow adventurers, because that too was a vital part of their experience. All right, settle in, friends. Let's imagine ourselves in the heart of the gold rush, right? Surrounded by sprawling wilderness, the deafening roar of the river, and the constant clang of pickaxes. It was a world so different from anything we can easily comprehend, and staying connected, simply hearing what was happening back home, was a monumental challenge. Think about it. No phones, no internet, no instant communication. News traveled at the speed of a horse, or more likely at the speed of a ship rounding the Horn of South America and eventually winding its way inland. The longing for news from loved ones must have been a constant ache for these miners. They'd left behind families, friends, sweethearts, entire lives, and now they were in this strange new world, desperately hoping for news that everyone they cared about was safe and well. So how did they manage? Well, one of the primary methods was, of course, the postal service. But this was no ordinary mail delivery we know today. Letters were precious commodities. They were carefully written, often on thin paper to save weight and therefore cost, and they were eagerly awaited. Can you just imagine the excitement and the trepidation as a miner finally received a letter? The joy of seeing a familiar handwriting, the fear of what news it might contain. Getting mail to and from the gold fields was a huge undertaking. The US Postal Service wasn't really equipped to handle the sudden influx of mail to such a remote and rapidly growing region. Stagecoaches became essential for transporting the mail, but these journeys were long, arduous, and often dangerous. Bandits and highwaymen were a constant threat, adding to the anxiety of waiting for news. The cost of postage was also substantial, especially for the average miner. It could take a significant chunk out of their meager earnings, further isolating those who were already struggling financially. This created a disparity. Those with money could afford to stay in touch, while those without were often left in the dark, deepening the sense of isolation. Newspapers played a critical role too. The boomtowns, almost overnight, saw the emergence of their own newspapers. These weren't exactly the pinnacle of journalistic integrity, mind you. They were often biased, sensational, and prone to exaggeration, but they were a lifeline to the outside world. Imagine a miner, after a long day of back-breaking labor, sitting by the flickering light of a candle, reading about events happening back east. Even if the news was weeks or months old, it was a way to feel connected, to feel like they were still part of the larger world. Newspapers also served as a form of entertainment, providing stories, advertisements, and even poetry to distract from the harsh realities of mining life. However, relying on newspapers for accurate information was risky. Rumors and gossip spread like wildfire in the gold fields, and these often found their way into print. It was hard to distinguish fact from fiction, and misinformation could have serious consequences, especially when it came to mining claims or business ventures. Another fascinating aspect of communication was the reliance on word of mouth. Miners traveling between camps and towns would carry news and messages. These traveling storytellers became informal news networks, spreading information and gossip from one settlement to another. These personal connections were incredibly important for maintaining morale and a sense of community. Sharing news, even if it was just local gossip, helped to break the monotony of daily life and reminded miners that they weren't entirely alone. Merchants and traders also played a crucial role in communication. They traveled extensively, bringing goods and supplies to remote mining camps, and in return they carried news and letters back to the larger towns and cities. These traveling merchants acted as unofficial postmen, helping to bridge the communication gap between the gold fields and the outside world. Now let's not forget about express companies like Wells Fargo. These companies capitalized on the demand for fast and reliable communication and transportation. They offered services like expedited mail delivery, package transport, and even banking, catering to the needs of the burgeoning gold rush economy. Wells Fargo became a symbol of reliability and trustworthiness in a chaotic and often lawless environment. They provided a vital service, connecting the remote mining camps with the outside world and helping to facilitate trade and commerce. Of course, with all these methods of communication, there was still the problem of time. News traveled slowly, and it could take months for a letter to reach its destination. This meant that miners were often living in the past, receiving information that was already outdated. This delay in communication could have profound emotional consequences. Miners might receive news of a death in the family months after it had occurred, or they might miss important milestones in the lives of their loved ones. This sense of disconnect and isolation could be incredibly difficult to bear. The challenges of communication during the gold rush highlight the importance of staying connected, even in the most remote and challenging environments. Miners relied on a combination of formal and informal methods to stay in touch with the outside world, and these connections were vital for maintaining morale, fostering a sense of community, and navigating the complexities of life in the gold fields. It really paints a picture of just how resourceful and determined these individuals needed to be, doesn't it? They carved a life out of nothing, and that included staying connected against all odds. Alright, settle in folks, because we're about to talk about winter. And let me tell you, winter in the gold fields wasn't exactly a picturesque snow globe scene. We're talking about a whole different level of hardship, a serious test of endurance that separated the seasoned miners from the greenhorns. Picture this, the already back-breaking labor of digging and panning, now compounded by freezing temperatures, relentless snow, and a scarcity of, well, pretty much everything. When those first snowflakes started falling, a miner's heart probably sank faster than a lead ingot in a river. The rivers themselves, which were the lifeblood of gold extraction, often froze over. Imagine trying to pan for gold with ice forming on your hands. Not fun, not productive. Downright miserable, actually. The sluice boxes, those essential tools for separating gold from gravel, became encased in ice, rendering them useless without constant fires burning beneath them. And the ground, rock solid. Forget about easily digging. You were hacking away at frozen earth with picks and shovels, expending twice the effort for half the reward. The challenges extended far beyond just the mining itself. Food supplies, which were already tenuous at best, became even scarcer and more expensive. Think about those supply routes, already difficult in good weather, now completely choked by snowdrifts and impassable mountain passes. Prices for basic necessities like flour, beans, and salt pork would skyrocket, making it a tough choice to either eat or freeze. Many miners were forced to supplement their meager rations with whatever they could scavenge: rabbits, squirrels, maybe the occasional deer if they were lucky and skilled hunters. But finding game in the dead of winter, that was a skill set all its own. Shelter became even more critical. Those flimsy tents that might have provided some semblance of comfort in the summer were simply inadequate against the biting winds and accumulating snow. Miners who had managed to build rough cabins were slightly better off, but even those offered limited protection against the cold. The constant battle was keeping warm, and that meant firewood, and lots of it. Days were spent not only trying to find gold but also gathering and chopping wood, a task that became increasingly difficult as the snow piled higher and higher. The threat of sickness also loomed large. Imagine cramped living quarters, poor sanitation, and inadequate nutrition, all combined with the constant exposure to the elements. Pneumonia, bronchitis, and other respiratory illnesses ran rampant, and medical care was practically non-existent. A cough that might be a minor annoyance in milder climates could quickly turn deadly in the harsh conditions of a gold rush winter. The best a miner could usually hope for was rest, warm broth if they could get it, and maybe maybe a swig of whiskey if they had any left. And then there was the loneliness. The long, dark winter days brought with them a sense of isolation and despair. With mining operations slowed to a crawl and travel nearly impossible, miners were often confined to their cabins or camps for weeks on end, with only their thoughts and the howling wind for company. This isolation could take a heavy toll on mental health, leading to depression, anxiety, and sometimes even more drastic measures. Letters from home when they arrived were treasured beyond measure, offering a lifeline to the outside world and a reminder of the lives they had left behind. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The winter months also offered a chance for some much-needed rest and recuperation, at least for those who could afford it. With mining activities curtailed, some miners would use the time to repair their equipment, mend their clothes, or simply catch up on sleep. Others would gather in the larger settlements to socialize, play cards, gamble, and maybe even attend the occasional dance or performance. These moments of levity, however fleeting, provided a welcome respite from the harsh realities of winter. Clever miners adapted. Some developed techniques for melting snow and ice to access water for panning. Others learned how to build more effective shelters, using snow and ice as insulation. And some simply packed up and left, heading for warmer climates, or waiting out the winter in the relative comfort of a boomtown saloon. Ultimately, surviving a gold rush winter was a testament to a miner's resilience, resourcefulness, and sheer will to survive. It was a time of immense hardship, but also a time of quiet reflection and camaraderie. Those who endured emerged tougher, more experienced, and perhaps with a deeper appreciation for the simple comforts of life. And when spring finally arrived, and the rivers began to thaw, they were ready to return to the gold fields with renewed hope and determination. So yeah, winter mining, not exactly a vacation, more like a survival test. One that many didn't make it through. Sweet dreams, everyone. Ah, California, the Golden State. It's a name that just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But have you ever really stopped to think about why it's called that? Well, the answer is, of course, the gold rush. But the story is so much bigger than just the shiny metal itself. The gold rush wasn't just about individual miners striking it rich, or more often not striking it rich. It completely reshaped California's economy and set the stage for the state we know today. Before 1848, California was, well, it was a bit of a sleepy backwater. A sparsely populated region primarily focused on agriculture and ranching. The population was a mix of Native Americans, California's people of Spanish or Mexican descent, and a smattering of American settlers. The economy was largely self-sufficient, trade was limited, and life moved at a much slower pace. Imagine quiet, dusty roads, the gentle lowing of cattle, and the warm sun beating down on adobe walls. It was a far cry from the bustling, technologically advanced hub that California is now. Then, bam, gold is discovered at Sutter's Mill, and everything changes. Almost overnight, the sleepy backwater transforms into a feverish hive of activity. People from all corners of the globe, from the eastern United States to Europe, South America, and even China, flooded into California, all chasing the same dream to strike it rich. This massive influx of people, known as the 49ers, because you guessed it, most of them arrived in 1840, completely transformed the state's demographics. And with this population boom came an economic boom of epic proportions. Think about it. All these people need everything: food, shelter, clothing, tools, supplies. The list goes on and on. Suddenly there was an enormous demand for goods and services that simply didn't exist before. Existing businesses, like those involved in agriculture, expanded rapidly to meet the needs of the growing population. But even more importantly, completely new industries sprang up like mushrooms after a rain shower. Merchants made fortunes selling picks, shovels, pans, and other mining equipment. Transportation companies, stagecoach lines and shipping companies thrived as they ferried people and supplies to and from the gold fields. Construction boomed as new towns and cities were built to house the swelling population. And agriculture, while initially struggling to keep up with demand, eventually expanded to become a major industry, feeding the miners and the growing urban centers. And of course, let's not forget about the saloons, gambling halls, and other forms of entertainment that catered to the miners' often short-lived wealth and their need to unwind after a long day of back-breaking labor. These establishments, while often associated with the more notorious aspects of the gold rush, were also a significant part of the economic landscape. Now here's a really interesting point. It wasn't necessarily the miners themselves who got rich. While some miners undoubtedly struck it big and made fortunes, the vast majority toiled away for months, even years, with little to show for their efforts. In fact, most of them barely managed to scrape together enough to cover their expenses. It was often the business owners, the merchants, the suppliers, the transportation operators who made the real money. They were the ones who consistently profited from the gold rush, regardless of whether the miners found gold or not. Think of it like selling shovels during a treasure hunt. You're guaranteed to make money whether the treasure is ever found. The rapid economic growth fueled by the gold rush had a profound impact on California's infrastructure. Before the gold rush, infrastructure was practically non-existent. The roads were little more than dirt tracks, and transportation was slow and difficult. But with the influx of people, and the need to move goods and supplies quickly and efficiently, new roads were built, waterways were improved, and eventually, railroads were constructed. These infrastructure improvements not only facilitated the gold rush itself, but also laid the groundwork for future economic development. They made it easier to transport goods and people, connect different parts of the state, and integrate California into the national and international economy. And speaking of integration, the gold rush played a crucial role in California's becoming a state. The massive population boom, triggered by the discovery of gold, led to a rapid increase in the number of residents, which qualified California for statehood. In 1850, just 2 years after the initial discovery of gold, California was admitted to the United States as the 31st state. This was a monumental event, not just for California but for the entire country. It solidified American control over the region, expanded the nation's territory, and added a new, dynamic state to the Union. However, it's important to remember that this economic boom came at a cost. The gold rush had a devastating impact on California's Native American populations, who were displaced from their lands, subjected to violence and disease, and saw their traditional way of life destroyed. The environmental consequences were also severe, with widespread deforestation, soil erosion, and water pollution caused by mining activities. So while the gold rush undoubtedly transformed California's economy and laid the foundation for its future prosperity, it's essential to acknowledge the darker side of this story. It was a period of immense opportunity and growth, but also one of great hardship and injustice for many. Looking back, it's really quite remarkable to see how quickly and dramatically California changed in such a short period of time. From a sleepy backwater to a bustling hub of commerce and innovation, all thanks to the allure of that shiny yellow metal. The gold rush was a pivotal moment in California's history, one that continues to shape the state's identity and economy to this very day. And while the gold may be long gone, the legacy of the 49ers lives on. Soft, gentle music fades in slightly. Alright, so you've spent months, maybe even years, chasing that glimmer of gold, that promise of fortune in the California hills. But the gold dust fairy tale, as we've seen, it doesn't always pan out, does it? And even if you did strike it rich, or at least made a decent living, the life of a gold rush miner, well, it's hard on the body, hard on the soul. Eventually, most folks start thinking about what comes next. What else is there beyond the relentless search, the back-breaking labor, the gamble that defined their days? The truth is, leaving the gold fields wasn't always a simple decision. Many miners arrived with nothing, gambling everything on the chance of striking it rich. Going home empty-handed often felt like admitting defeat, a return to the life they'd so desperately tried to escape. And even those who had accumulated some wealth faced a new dilemma: how to make it last, how to transition from the boom and bust cycle of mining to something more stable, more sustainable. So what were the options for a miner looking to hang up their pickaxe and pan? Well, for starters, California itself was booming, transforming from a sparsely populated territory into a vibrant, rapidly growing state. All that new wealth, all those new people, they created opportunities beyond the gold fields. Agriculture, for instance, was taking off. The fertile valleys of California, previously used mainly for grazing, were being transformed into fields of wheat, orchards of fruit trees, and vineyards that would eventually make California a world-renowned wine region. Mining, you see, was exhausting. Farming, while still demanding, offered the chance to build something lasting, something tangible. You could cultivate the land, raise livestock, and create a stable food source for yourself and your family, maybe even contribute to feeding the growing population of the state. And unlike gold mining, where success depended on luck and dwindling resources, agriculture offered a degree of control, a sense of building something from the ground up. Then there was the allure of business. The boom towns that sprung up around the gold fields needed everything. Merchants, traders, suppliers, all were essential to keeping the mining operations running and providing for the miners' basic needs. Supplying those goods and services became a solid opportunity. Some former miners used their savings to open stores, selling everything from groceries and hardware to clothing and tools. Others became freight haulers, transporting goods between the coast and the mining camps. Still others invested in saloons, gambling halls, and other entertainment venues, catering to the miners' thirst for recreation and distraction. These ventures weren't without their risks, of course. Competition could be fierce, and boom towns were notoriously volatile, prone to sudden declines if a mine dried up or a new strike drew people away. But for those with a knack for business and a willingness to work hard, these opportunities offered a chance to build a more stable, long-term income than mining ever could. And don't forget about the skilled trades. Carpenters, blacksmiths, engineers, surveyors, all were in high demand in the rapidly expanding towns and cities of California. Miners who had experience in these trades could easily find work, often earning significantly more than they had in the gold fields. A carpenter, for example, could build houses, stores, and other structures, contributing to the physical infrastructure of the growing communities. A blacksmith could repair tools, forge new ones, and even manufacture custom-made items for miners and other tradespeople. And engineers and surveyors were essential for planning and developing new towns, roads, and mining operations. The growth of California also created opportunities in professions that served the needs of the burgeoning population. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, all were in short supply and high demand. While these professions often required formal training, some miners were able to transition into these fields through self-study or apprenticeship. A former miner with a good head for numbers, for instance, could become a bookkeeper or accountant, helping businesses manage their finances. Someone with a natural talent for writing could become a journalist or editor, contributing to the growing number of newspapers and magazines that were springing up across the state. For some, the allure of the land remained strong, but not necessarily in the form of traditional agriculture. The vast expanses of California offered opportunities for ranching and cattle raising. Miners who had saved enough money could purchase land and start their own ranches, raising cattle for beef, sheep for wool, or horses for transportation. Ranching was a demanding lifestyle, requiring long hours and a deep understanding of animal husbandry. But it also offered a sense of independence and self-sufficiency, a connection to the land that many former miners found appealing. And with the growing demand for meat and other livestock products, ranching could be a very profitable venture. Of course, not everyone who left the gold fields found success in these new ventures. Some struggled to adapt to the different pace and demands of other industries. Others were simply unlucky, making poor investments or falling victim to fraud or misfortune. The transition from mining to other opportunities wasn't always easy or seamless, and sometimes, despite the hardships and uncertainties, some miners just couldn't shake the allure of gold. They might try their hand at farming or business for a while, but eventually they would find themselves drawn back to the gold fields, back to the hope of striking it rich. The lure of gold, it could be a powerful thing, hard to resist, even after years of disappointment. But for many, the decision to leave the gold fields marked a turning point in their lives. It was a chance to build something new, to create a more stable and sustainable future, and to contribute to the growth and development of a state that was rapidly transforming before their very eyes. It was a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit, the ability to learn, to grow, and to find new opportunities, even in the face of adversity. And so, after months, perhaps years, of back-breaking labor, enduring hardship, and chasing that elusive dream of striking it rich, the time came for many a gold rush miner to contemplate the long journey home. But the return was rarely as straightforward or as celebratory as one might imagine in a victory-filled daydream. For some, the ships heading east, or the wagons rolling back across the plains, carried men laden with gold, fulfilling their wildest hopes. These were the success stories, the whispers that fueled the dreams of those still sifting through the mud. These men, if they were wise, would return to their families, their communities, as changed individuals. The gold rush had been a crucible, forging new strengths, and perhaps revealing hidden flaws. They'd invest their newfound wealth, start businesses, buy land, and hopefully find a measure of peace and stability that had eluded them in the chaotic gold fields. But even for these fortunate few, the return wasn't without its challenges. Readjusting to a settled life after the wild, unpredictable existence of a miner could be jarring. The close-knit bonds forged in the camps, the shared struggles and victories, were often difficult to replicate back home. And the weight of responsibility, of managing wealth and expectations, could prove to be a heavy burden indeed. Far more common, sadly, were the stories of disappointment. The vast majority of miners didn't strike it rich. They toiled tirelessly, enduring hardship and deprivation, only to find themselves with little more than they had when they arrived, or even less. Some were even burdened with debt, accumulated from loans to cover expenses, failed mining ventures, or simply the high cost of living in the gold fields. For these men, the return home was often a somber affair. The journey back was a constant reminder of their failed dreams, of the sacrifices made in vain. The shame of returning empty-handed could be crushing, especially if they had painted a picture of imminent wealth in their letters home. Imagine the sinking feeling as they approached their hometown, the faces of loved ones peering out from porches, filled with anticipation. How would they explain their lack of success? How would they face the disappointment in their family's eyes? It was a bitter pill to swallow. And then there was the issue of the long journey itself. Whether by sea or by land, the journey home was fraught with peril. Shipwrecks were common, disease could spread rapidly among the passengers, and overland routes were still vulnerable to attack by bandits or hostile Native American tribes. Even the weather could be a formidable adversary, with blizzards in the mountains and scorching heat in the deserts. The journey home often involved long stretches of boredom and discomfort, cramped quarters, poor food, and the constant rocking of the ship or jostling of the wagon could wear down even the most resilient traveler. And the sheer monotony of the journey, day after day of the same scenery and the same faces, could take a toll on the mind. Many miners who found no gold did find something else, a taste for adventure, a desire to explore the unknown. The journey west and the life they'd lived in the gold fields could change a person forever. Some of these returned home with a newfound wanderlust. They could never settle back into the quiet routines of their former lives. They had seen too much, experienced too much, to be content with the ordinary. Instead of returning to their previous occupations, some chose to pursue new ventures. They might use their experience in the gold fields to start businesses related to mining or transportation, or they might simply seek out new opportunities in the rapidly growing towns and cities of the West. The gold rush also left its mark on those who never made it home. Some died of disease, accidents, or violence in the gold fields. Others simply disappeared, their fates unknown. Their families were left to mourn their loss, never knowing for certain what had become of them. And for those who did return, the experience of the gold rush often had a profound impact on their lives. It could strengthen their character, broaden their horizons, and give them a new appreciation for the simple things in life. But it could also leave them scarred, disillusioned, and forever haunted by the memories of the hardships they had endured. No matter the outcome, the journey home marked the end of an era, the closing of a chapter in their lives. It was a time for reflection, for reassessment, and for preparing for whatever the future might hold. The stories of those returning from the gold fields are a reminder that the pursuit of wealth is not always a path to happiness. True fulfillment, more often than not, is found in the bonds of family and community, in the simple pleasures of life, and in the satisfaction of honest work. And so the gold rush dream, for many, dissolved like dust on the long road home. But even in disappointment, there was a story to be told, a lesson to be learned, and a new chapter waiting to begin. All right, friends, let's gently float into the sunset of our gold rush journey and explore what lasting echoes these frenzied years left on society and culture. It's kind of amazing, when you think about it, how much of what we still see and feel today can be traced back to this relatively short, intense period. The gold rush wasn't just about finding shiny rocks. It really reshaped California, and by extension the entire United States. Think about it. Before 1848, California was a sparsely populated territory recently acquired from Mexico. Then, bam, hundreds of thousands of people flooded in, practically overnight. This population boom, fueled by dreams of instant wealth, led to California's rapid statehood in 1850. Can you imagine the speed of that transition, from almost nothing to a full-fledged state in just a couple of years? It's mind-boggling, really. And that influx of people, well, they didn't just bring picks and shovels. They brought ideas, cultures, and ambitions from all over the world. This created a uniquely diverse society, a melting pot of languages, traditions, and ways of life. San Francisco, in particular, became a cosmopolitan hub, a place where you could hear a dozen different languages spoken on a single block. Of course, that diversity also led to its fair share of tension and conflict, as we've touched on, but it undeniably enriched the cultural tapestry of the region. The gold rush also acted as a massive catalyst for economic growth. Beyond the gold itself, the demand for goods and services skyrocketed. This spurred the development of agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. Farmers in the Sacramento Valley, for instance, found a ready market for their produce, feeding the hungry miners in the foothills. New industries sprung up to supply mining equipment, transportation, and everyday necessities. Basically, the gold rush provided this incredible jump-start to the economy, paving the way for California to become the economic powerhouse it is today. But the impacts weren't just economic and demographic. The gold rush also left a powerful mark on our collective imagination. It became this iconic symbol of the American dream, the idea that anyone, regardless of their background, could strike it rich through hard work and a little bit of luck. Now, as we know, that dream was often more of a myth than a reality, but it still captured the popular imagination and fueled a spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation that continues to resonate today. Think about the stories, the legends, the folklore that grew out of the gold rush. Tales of daring prospectors, boomtown saloons, and lawless outlaws have been immortalized in countless books, movies, and television shows. The Wild West persona, with all its romanticism and rugged individualism, is largely a product of this era. It's become ingrained in our national identity, a part of the story we tell ourselves about who we are. However, it's important to acknowledge the darker side of this legacy. The gold rush came at a tremendous cost to the Native American populations, as we've sadly discussed. Their lands were stolen, their cultures were disrupted, and their very survival was threatened by disease, violence, and displacement. The environmental damage caused by mining practices also continues to have an impact today. Rivers were polluted, forests were destroyed, and entire landscapes were altered in the pursuit of gold. So it's important to remember these less glamorous aspects of the story, to acknowledge the suffering and destruction that accompanied the boom. And even beyond those very large impacts, the echoes of the gold rush continue to reverberate in other, smaller ways. For example, many of the towns and cities that sprung up during the gold rush era still exist today, maintaining their unique character and charm. You can visit these places, walk the streets where miners once walked, and get a sense of what life was like back then. Plus, the gold rush inspired technological advancements that continue to influence us. Hydraulic mining, although environmentally devastating, was a feat of engineering at the time. Innovations in transportation, like the development of stagecoach lines and eventually the transcontinental railroad, were driven by the need to move people and goods to and from the gold fields. These advancements had a lasting impact on the development of the West. So as we gently wrap things up here, remember that the gold rush wasn't just a historical event. It was a transformative experience that shaped California, the United States, and even our collective identity. It was a story of ambition, opportunity, hardship, and ultimately, both triumph and tragedy. By understanding the real lives of the gold rush miners, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the complexities of the past and its lasting impact on the present. And hopefully, we can learn from the mistakes that were made and work towards a more just and sustainable future. Sweet dreams, my friends. So, we've reached the end of our journey, a journey through the dusty, demanding, and often devastating lives of the gold rush miners. And you might be wondering, after all that hardship and struggle, what can we actually learn from these hopeful, sometimes desperate souls who chased a shimmering dream in the California wilderness? Well, for starters, it's a powerful reminder that history, and indeed life itself, is rarely as glamorous as the stories we tell ourselves. The romantic image of striking it rich, becoming instantly wealthy by simply panning for gold, that was the exception, not the rule. The reality, as we've seen, involved back-breaking labor, constant setbacks, and a very real possibility of ending up worse off than when you started. And in the dark quiet, let's remember all those that did not make it home at all. But that doesn't mean the story is one of pure negativity. In fact, quite the opposite. The gold rush miners, despite facing incredible odds, displayed a remarkable spirit of resilience and adaptability. They left behind everything familiar, venturing into the unknown with nothing but hope and a few tools, and they faced challenges head-on, innovating and creating new ways to survive in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Think about that for a moment. They built communities from scratch, literally out of the dust of the gold fields, and forged bonds of camaraderie that helped them endure the loneliness and isolation of their lives. Their experiences also teach us about the importance of community, even in the face of immense competition and personal ambition. The gold rush, while driven by individual greed, also fostered a sense of shared experience and mutual support. Miners relied on each other for everything, from sharing information about promising claims to providing assistance in times of illness or injury. They understood that survival, and even success, was often dependent on the strength of their connections with others. In our own lives, it's a good reminder that we don't have to go it alone. Leaning on our friends, family, and even our wider community can make all the difference when we are pursuing our goals or just navigating difficult times. Now, reflecting on the darker aspects of the gold rush, there's the very important lesson about the devastating impact of unchecked ambition and the consequences of prioritizing profit over people and the environment. The displacement and suffering of Native American populations, the exploitation of immigrant workers, and the environmental damage caused by reckless mining practices. These are stark reminders of the ethical considerations that we must consider when chasing our dreams, whatever they may be. It's about taking responsibility for our actions and understanding the wider consequences of our choices. How can we achieve our goals without harming others or damaging the world around us? It's a question that demands constant reflection. The story of the gold rush also offers a fascinating insight into the complexities of human nature. We see examples of extraordinary generosity and selflessness alongside acts of greed and violence. We see ambition and perseverance tempered by disappointment and despair. It is a portrait of people at their best and at their worst, a microcosm of the human condition itself. Moreover, the gold rush demonstrates the power of dreams, even when they are ultimately unrealized. While very few miners actually struck it rich, the belief that they could, the hope that drove them forward, was a powerful force. It propelled them through hardship, inspired them to innovate, and bound them together. Perhaps the true treasure of the gold rush wasn't gold itself, but rather the human potential that was unleashed in its pursuit. The lesson there is to not be afraid to dream big, even if the odds are stacked against you. The act of striving, the pursuit of something greater, can be just as valuable as the achievement itself. Let's also consider the economic impact of the gold rush. It fueled California's growth and transformed it into the economic powerhouse it is today. It attracted people from all over the world, creating a diverse and dynamic society. It sparked innovation in transportation, agriculture, and finance. It's a powerful example of how a single event can have far-reaching consequences, shaping the course of history in unexpected ways. And finally, the gold rush serves as a reminder of the ephemeral nature of wealth and the importance of perspective. Many miners who did strike it rich quickly squandered their fortunes, falling victim to greed, poor judgment, or simply bad luck. Others who never found gold discovered other forms of wealth in the friendships they forged, the skills they acquired, and the experiences they had. Ultimately, the gold rush teaches us that true wealth is not just about money, but about the richness of our lives, the strength of our relationships, and the lessons we learn along the way. So as we reflect on the lives of those who chased the dream of gold, let's take these lessons to heart. Let us remember their resilience, their community spirit, and their unwavering hope. Let us learn from their mistakes and strive to create a world where ambition is tempered by empathy and where success is measured not just by wealth, but by the positive impact we have on the world around us. And let's try to fall asleep, remembering that maybe, just maybe, the real gold is inside of us all along.